Shalom Aleichem, everybody. We're continuing with our series of virtual Divrei Torah. I'd like to start off by wishing all those in need of a refuah shlema, refuah shlema b'karov, all those in need of a consolation should have a consolation b'karov. This week we start off a new book of the Chumash, the book of Bamidbar, Chumash Apkudim, as it's known in the language of Chazal, or in English, the book of Numbers. And the reason why it's has that name, that moniker, is because the Parsha and the Chumash, the Sefer, starts off with Hashem's command to Moshe, Bamidbar Sinai, in the desert of Sinai. That's where the name Bamidbar comes from. The commandment was Bamidbar Sinai, in the desert of Sinai. Hashem commands Moshe to take a census of the Jewish people. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zatzal, points out that there's actually a major difference between this census, which is conducted at the beginning of this week's Parsha, and the census which was conducted earlier in the Chumash in the book of Shmos. He points out that the census that was conducted in the book of Shmos was just one lump sum. Each Jew gave a half shekel, all the half shekels were counted, and one grand total of approximately 600,000 men of army age, above the age of 20, was arrived at. As opposed to the census at the beginning of this week's Parsha was Lemishbechosam Leveis Avosam. It was based on family and tribal affiliation. And the question is why? Why was the earlier census the tribes were not a factor, as opposed to this census was conducted according to tribes? A sum total for each tribe was arrived at, and then all the tribes were added together to get the grand total number of the Jewish people. Why the difference? So Rabbi Yaakov points out very beautifully. He says that in the book of Shmos, the Mishkan was not yet constructed, and therefore there was no unifying force per se. In other words, the Jews, we know, the Torah tells us, the tribes were encamped around the Mishkan, with the Mishkan at the center of the encampment. So long as there was not that unifying force of the Mishkan, there was the danger, if we emphasize tribal affiliation, that could lead to factionalism and divisiveness. However, once the Mishkan was constructed, and now was set up at the center of the Jewish camp, with the tribes encamped all around the Mishkan, now the Mishkan is a unifying agent, a unifying factor, and now not only is it safe, but it's even laudable, it's appropriate to celebrate the Jewish diversity and tribal affiliation. And each tribe brings to the table its own unique nature and character traits and talents and abilities. Now it's appropriate that we are bound together by the Mishkan in the middle to celebrate our diversity. And I think that's a very important lesson in terms of the Jewish community at large, even nowadays, which is that, of course, at the core level, we have to be unified. We have the Mishkan, and actually the center of the Mishkan was actually the Torah itself, right? The Holy of Holies contained the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron, which had the tablets of the Ten Commandments in it, and later the Torah scroll that Moshe wrote. So really the Torah is the essence, is the center point of the Mishkan. So it's really the Torah is what binds the entire Jewish community together. Torah and Jewish law, halacha, Torah, mitzvos, halacha, that's what unifies us, and that's what binds us together. So once we have that unifying agent, the Torah doesn't want us to be just a homogeneous blob. The Torah celebrates our diversity and our uniqueness. In fact, Chazal tell us that Kemo shepartzufein ein doma zu lezu, kach deoseinu ein doma zu lezu. Just like people's facial appearances are not identical with each other, they're unique and diverse, so too people's thought processes are diverse and unique, and God created people like that. God wants diversity. God wants people to serve them in their own unique and special fashion. But of course, that all has to be contained within the unifying boundaries of Torah and Halacha. But once we have those unifying boundaries, then not only is it safe to show our diversity, we celebrate our diversity and uniqueness. So I think that's a very important lesson for us, that we have to, on the one hand, of course, have to be within the parameters of Torah and Halacha, Torah and Jewish law. That is what binds us together and unifies us. That has to be the core. Unity has to be the core. But once we have that essential unity, not only is it safe, but it's even laudable that we celebrate our diversity and what we each uniquely bring to the table in terms of our own unique path in the service of the Almighty. I think it's a very important and powerful lesson. As we mentioned in last week's video, that the Shabbos before Chag HaShavuos is always Parshas Bamidbar, right? We mentioned that B'chukosai, with the Tochacha, is the second Shabbos before Chag HaShavuos, and that means that the Shabbos immediately preceding Shavuos is always Parshas Bamidbar. And the question is, what is the connection between Parshas Bamidbar and the upcoming holiday of Shavuos? Why is that the Parsha that Chazal chose to always read before the holiday of Shavuos? Of course, on a basic level, many point out that the very term that Hashem gave, the opening verse of the Parsha and the Sefer, Hashem gave this commandment to Moshe, Bamidbar Sinai, in the desert of Sinai, and that the whole Parsha and book is called Bamidbar, the desert, is very much connected to Matan Torah, that Hashem gave us the Torah on Shavuos in the desert of Sinai, and that itself teaches us many lessons. One of the lessons famously that Chazal say is that the Torah is like the desert, that just like the desert is hefker, is ownerless, and it's not private property of any individual, so too the Torah itself is not the private property of any particular Jew. It's open to all those who want to come and study it and observe it. That's a very important lesson in regards to Torah and Matan Torah. But I think there's an additional lesson, an additional connection to Parshas Bamidbar and the upcoming holiday of Shavuos, which is as follows. The Torah in the Parshas Bamidbar not only describes the commandment to make a census, to conduct a census based on tribal affiliation, but also then Hashem goes on to command Moshe that in the formation of the encampment of the Jewish people, he says, I want a certain makeup, a certain formation, a certain layout of how I want the Jewish camp to look, with a Mishkan, as we said, at the center, and then the tribe of Levi encamped around the Mishkan, and then the rest of the tribes encamped around the tribe of Levi. And not only should they be encamped in that certain formation, that's also, they should travel. When they travel from location to location, from encampment to encampment, they should also travel with a certain formation, again, with a Mishkan at the center of the traveling formation. So this Parsha really lays out for us in an ideal sense what the Jewish encampment should look like, with the Mishkan at the center, with its divine presence there, with the cloud of glory on top of the Mishkan, and then each of the tribes encamped in their particular position around the Mishkan. And the Ramban, Nachmanides, explains that what is the role of the Mishkan? Right? The role of the Mishkan, he says, in part, is to take that one-time godly revelation of Mount Sinai, of Har Sinai, which is a once-in-history spectacular revelation, and to have it with them on a permanent basis, to concretize it and have it with them on a permanent basis. That's the role of the Mishkan, because after all, as we mentioned, the Mishkan has at its center the tablets with the Ten Commandments on it. That's the center of the Mishkan and the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy of Holies. And then, of course, you have the cloud of glory resting on the Mishkan. So the divine presence, which was revealed at Har Sinai, was with them in a constant basis. That revelation of Har Sinai should continue with them, and they should take with them on a constant basis. That's the idea of the Mishkan according to the Ramban. So I think what the Torah is telling us, by putting Parshas Bamidbar, which describes this setup with the Mishkan, with the tablets in the middle, and the Shechina, and the divine presence, the cloud of glory, the Anon, on top of the Mishkan, and then the tribes encamped around it. That's the way Torah is kind of giving us an ideal blueprint of what we ideally look like in our best sense, if you will. This is the ideal makeup of the Machne Yisrael, what the Jewish community, what the Jewish people should look like, and the Torah gives us this ideal picture before the holiday of Matan Torah, as if to say that yes, coming up is that we are about to celebrate this one-time spectacular revelation of God at Har Sinai, but the end goal is not to have it be just a one-time spectacular event, but it's to take that revelation with us and bring it with us and have it with us in a constant day-to-day basis. And that is what is being described in Parshas Bamidbar, that this is the ultimate ideal layout and blueprint of what the Jewish people should look like on a constant basis, with the Shechina, which revealed itself at Har Sinai with us on a permanent basis, as the Ramban explains, is the purpose of the Mishkan, that being the center, with the Ten Commandments in the center of the Mishkan, and then all the Jews encamped around the Mishkan with kind of the focal point being the Shechina and the Torah in the center. That's the ideal layout. So the Torah is giving us that ideal layout in anticipation of Chag HaShavuos to tell us, yes, we're about to celebrate a one-time spectacular revelation, but I want you to have in mind beforehand that you're going to take this one-time spectacular revelation of Shavuos with you, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is what ideally it should look like on a permanent basis. Is this layout as painted in Parshas Bamidbar with the Mishkan and the Shechina and the tablets in the Ark of the Covenant in the center, and then the way all the tribes of Israel encamped and are camped around it and focused on the Mishkan and the Shechina in the middle. That is what it's going to look like on a permanent basis. So it's giving us a glimpse, even before the great revelation, of what the end goal of the revelation is going to be, or should be, that we take that one-time spectacular revelation and have it with us in a permanent basis. And this is the layout of what it should look like when we have it with us on a permanent basis. I think that's an additional connection between Parshas Bamidbar and the upcoming holiday of Shavuos, and why Chazal or Mesaken that set up the situation that we always read this parsha before the holiday of Shavuos. So I think, again, it's also a very important lesson that we experience, God willing, spiritual highs in our life, and that's very important, like the holiday of Shavuos. But the end goal of this spiritual high is not to just leave it as a one-time event, but it's to take it with us and to internalize it and to concretize it and have it travel with us and be with us in day-to-day encampments, in our day-to-day lives, in our day-to-day homes. That is really the end goal of this spectacular, one-time spectacular revelation, is to have it with us and be with us, have it be with us on a permanent basis. I think that's part of the lesson of why Parshas Bamidbar is always read before the holiday of Shavuos. May we merit to have a tremendous revelation and to be in contact and in connection with that tremendous divine revelation, which God willing will experience on the holiday of Shavuos. And may we be zocha, as we learn in this week's parsha, that not to leave it as a one-time revelation, but to take that with us, to take the godliness, that godly revelation that we'll experience, God willing, in Matan Torah and Shavuos, and to have it with us, be a part of our homes, part of our permanent encampment, part of our permanent setup, whether we're traveling or whether we're encamped. Always have that divine presence with us that we saw and connected to on the holiday of Shavuos. May we be zocha to that blessing, and of course, once we're connected to the Shechina, to God's presence, we bring Him with us wherever we go. We'll be zocha for all the blessings. May we be zocha for an end to this current difficulty. May we be zocha to healing, just like the Jews were healed in anticipation of Matan Torah. It says anyone who had any physical ailment was healed in anticipation of Matan Torah. May we be zocha that we experience the same thing as they did then. May we experience it again now, and may we ultimately lead to the ultimate revelation of the coming of the final and complete redemption. Meir V'Yameinu. Have a great Shabbos. All the best. Have a good Shabbos and a good Yom Tov.